let's talk a little bit about the background of the artists leading up to the creation of this album, The Mollusk. So, Ween is the brainchild of two friends from New Hope, PA, Aaron Freeman and Mickey Malchiato. So, more commonly known by the stage names of Gene and Dean Ween. Gene is Aaron, Dean is Mickey. So they hail from New Hope, Pennsylvania, which is a small town. It's about a half hour north of Philadelphia, right on the border with New Jersey. And again, like I said, it kind of plays a role in the story of Ween. It had always been this artsy enclave known for its theater and music scene. And one thing that I learned this week that I was not aware of is that New Hope, PA was traditionally where many musicals were tested out and fine tuned before they would debut on Broadway. And
Wow.
so there was a playhouse in, I think it was called like the Bucks County Playhouse in New Hope, that would put on these big Broadway productions with the actual Broadway stars before they would debut on Broadway. So it led to a bunch of these like composers and writers and musicians and Broadway stars getting second homes in New Hope in like the 70s and the 80s so that they could then live down there for periods while they were sort of testing out their material, which led to a lot of interest in the arts, a lot of funding for the arts. You know, you have a lot of kind of rich and very successful, very artsy people living in the community. And it became one of those sort of magnets for people in the area to move there because they wanted that kind of experience.
That's
Kind of
interesting.
similar to
Yeah.
Austin, how Austin, the city, invested very heavily in their orchestra in, I think, the 60s or something like that, and brought a lot of really talented orchestra musicians to the Austin area. And that's one of the things that led to the Austin music explosion later, as those people were like having kids and getting involved in their schools. And, you know, the music programs were off the charts because you had all of this musical talent that had been drawn there because of a conscious investment from the city. And so it leads to, as you're just growing up, even if you are not a kid who would traditionally be thought of as somebody who's super into music, music's everywhere. It's kind of all around you. And so a lot of people got into music.
It's a
So
cool town. It reminded me almost of a mini sort of Woodstock, not as far as the Woodstock festival type of thing, but just the artsy kind of vibe, a little bit more upscale, but that seems to be more the influence of like the Bucks County, folks they're more well-heeled that have started, coming to the area more, but it's a cool town for sure.
in the time that they were coming about, because they were both born in 1970, it was way less of an affluent area. And it was more kind of like, I wouldn't say blue collar working class, but there's a lot in California. There's a lot of these like very artsy mountain towns that are getting a lot of attention now, and the property values have gone up. But traditionally, they were kind of like working class, but also very artsy. And it kind of had that vibe going for it. You know, it's a progressive town, it's very liberal, it's a small town. And in a progressive, liberal, small town, if you're a weird kid, like how do you rebel in a town that's kind of permissive and a kind of like, you know, very liberal and progressive town? Well, you basically start a band whose name is a dick joke. So both Aaron and Mickey, born in 1970, Aaron was born in Philadelphia, Mickey's born in Trenton. They end up meeting in the 80s. They kind of knew each other, but they weren't really friends. And so they end up meeting in junior high because they got sat next to each other for a typing class. Now, again, like I said, pretty small, but they don't particularly like each other at the time because Mickey was kind of like a jock asshole, according to Aaron. And according to Mickey, Aaron was kind of like a trench coat wearing weirdo, you know, kind of emo kid. And they just really didn't think that they had much in common. I get the vibes that it was like Emilio Estevez and Judd Nelson and the Breakfast Club type of guys, you know, like, and then they get stuck together and all of a sudden they realize they got a lot in common, you know. We really kind of like the same things. Mickey, despite being again like kind of a jock, also has a fanzine that he is creating where he's putting out and he's going to the record store every day buying records. He's described as like a very outgoing, kind of like precocious, pretentious kid, like who at 13 was like, I got my own zine, writing articles about the local music scene and stuff like that.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And again, it shows something that Rob talked about, which is that they are workhorses. They really do create a lot of material. They don't sit on their laurels a whole lot. Now they have become less creative as they've gotten older and gotten more successful, but they really do make kind of a lot of albums.
Well, and I think it goes back to something that we've talked about on the show, whether it was bands like CCR or you go down the list, but there's something about the people who they're already friends when they start the band, and it cuts through a lot of noise, I think, and it helps. I think when you're forming a band with people that you're already friends with, you can more quickly get to that common language that you're looking for. And so they obviously have had some kind of simpatico thing, to be able to do it that long. And yeah, so I think there's something to be said for that.
Versus putting something in the classified ads saying, hey, looking for a songwriter. And then you go through 100 people and you're like, wow, you're terrible. We don't mesh at all. Yeah.
Band forming, need keyboard, guitar, drums, and a singer.
Writer and singer.
Searching for enemies for next band.
Yeah. Well, and one of the other things is your friends inform your tastes so much that when your tastes line up, it makes it so much easier to make art together, because there's not a like, I don't even like the kind of music that you like. So when you achieve what you think is a great song, I'm like, I hate that song because I just don't like that kind of music. But if you like the same kind of music, it's a lot easier to do.
Yeah, and that sense of music.
That's a question. I don't know. You saw my Hoobastank collection, man. You would close it down.
Collection.
So they meet, they're 14 years old. They decide, hey, we got a lot in common. We should form a band. And just to give you an idea of where they are maturity wise, they decide to call their band Ween because it is a portmanteau of the words wuss and penis mushed together. And so that is where the name Ween came.
Wow.
Excellent.
And can you confirm if they knew the term portmanteau at that age?
Oh, I can guarantee you they did not. And they also
how
then
about Weenus? No, let's just go.
Yeah,
Ween.
so there's, I mean, sure, there were lots of iterations that were kicked around. They probably had, again, the piece of loose leaf with all the different names written on it. One of them was probably wuss and one of them was probably penis. And they're like, hey, you know what? We can't name the band Penis, but we can name the band Ween. And I learned that this week, that's where the name came from. But Ween has always been very evocative of a dick, like the entire time. It's like you can't hear the name Ween for a band like this and be like, oh yeah, there's something dick related to that. That's got to be a dick joke. They also decide that Aaron and Mickey not going to do it. They are going to create alter egos, Dean and Gene Ween, for their band, which honestly, stroke of genius at 14 years old to be like, yeah, you know what? Dean and Gene Ween, that's a pretty hot band. We should totally do that.
Yeah, I'm already in at this point in the conversation. Like, I'm excited about the band now.
Yeah, totally. There is a great clip of them playing their first show in 1986 at their high school talent show. And I don't know if it's one of them, but before they come on stage, there's like an announcer that is like hyping them up and saying like, a band of legends in the area, literally like just making up a whole bunch of shit. They said described by NME as the best thing since cheese. Like, it's just super weird. And they go on for kind of a long time. And then they get on stage and they're fucking terrible. They're so bad. But they have this swagger and presence that actually really kind of works well. Like, they sound terrible, but they look like they're having a great time. And everybody's kind of responding to them, just sort of dancing around, just shout singing over a really crappy guitar. Because 2 guitars and a drummer at the time. They brought in this guy, Chris Williams, aka Mean Ween, on drums. And he shows up on some of the albums later. In fact, on this one as well. But yeah, surprisingly, they actually kind of get a following and they start to play some gigs around town. We're going to get into that. But first, we're going to do our favorite segment on the podcast. We are going to do Ween by the numbers. Now, the first number that I'm going to throw out is 131 million, which is the number of streams for their most popular song, Ocean Man. And then the next number I'm going to throw out is 117 million, which is how many more streams Ocean Man has than their second most streamed song. It falls off very precipitously.
It's a long way to the bottom. I noticed that too.
Yeah. And we'll get into why later, but 1,473. That was the population of New Hope, Pennsylvania in 1980 when Ween were getting their start.
Wow.
So the next number, this is a small town, right? You think you think 30 miles north of Philly, it's going to be bigger, but it's really a small town. The next number is 69, which is the number of people in Dean and Jean Ween's graduating high school class. So again, very small.
Something tells me
because it was 69.
Something tells me they orchestrated that somehow. Like it was 70 and they like killed one guy to
Killed the guy for a sex joke.
They just convinced one of them to drop out. They're like, yeah, just drop out. That'll be better that way. The next number is also 69. Woo! That is the highest chart position for this album on the Australian charts. They, for some reason, have always been way bigger in Australia than they have been in the United States.
Everything's upside down there, as we know.
The next number that we're going to throw out there is the number 10. And that is the number of tracks on their album 12 Golden Country Greats, which is always just tickled me pink. I really love that.
The album title is 12 and the track quantity is 10.
Yes.
I
The album is
kinda
12
love that.
Golden
I
Country
kinda love
Greats with
that.
10 tracks. It's pretty great. Yeah.
It's actually a decent album. They go really all in on the country
Yeah.
genre.
We'll get into that. It's quite good, and it's completely nonsensical the way that they even came about getting to that album. But more on that later. The next number that we're going to throw out is at least one, and that is the number of tracks on every Ween album that actively try to get you to stop listening. I think we can identify at least one, maybe two on this album. We'll talk about that later. And then the last number that we're going to throw out is, again, at least one, and that is the number of very successful franchises that were directly inspired by this album. We'll touch on that later. If you guys don't know the story behind it, we'll get to it at some point in the retelling here.
Ooh, all right.
And before we get back into the story of Ween, I just wanted to say thank you to everybody for listening. We really do have a ton of fun doing this. We hope you have a ton of fun listening. Thank you to all of our Patreon subscribers and just visitors who voted on this album, forcing me to do the research on this, because there's not a whole lot of info on Ween. You'd think that there would be. There's not a whole lot of verifiable info on Ween, but
Mostly Reddit.
we love doing this. We started doing this mostly for ourselves, and the response that we've gotten from all of you listeners has been fantastic, and we really feel like we have a good tribe of people that listen to along with us to these albums, and we get some great opinions on the Patreon. If you guys want to go check it out, 1001 Album Complaints on Patreon. We have our 70s one-hit wonder song battle up there. We have our Guilty Pleasures episodes up there. There's a lot of good extra material on there that you can check out for the low, low price of $5 a month. But if you just want to join for free, you can participate in the polls. You can get into the conversation, because there's some great conversation going on over there. So thank you all for listening. Let's get back into the story of Ween, how they came to be and how they came to make this album. So we're going to level set. They played their first show in 1986 at their high school talent show. They're terrible, but they are still surprisingly charming, and they are charismatic enough that they start to get a following. It's not entirely surprising that they were not great on stage, because Mickey did say at the time that they were specifically trying to be obnoxious. And by at that time, I think he might mean to this very day.
I love that.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So despite sounding terrible, their swagger and stage presence makes that band work. They get a pretty decent response, and they decide, hey, let's keep making music. Let's keep playing shows. However, this 2-guitar player and a drummer format is not exactly what the crowds want. They need to mix that up. So they decide to go with just 2 guitar players and backing tracks recorded on a DAT tape and played behind them. So that's what you see when you see Ween for the first many, many, many years of their time as a band. It's just two guys on stage and there's pre-recorded backing tracks playing, and one of them's playing a guitar, the other one's sometimes playing a guitar and singing. It's a
I
bizarre
The
thing.
touring's expensive, man. You gotta cut the fat.
No, they're
where you
not
can.
touring. They're not playing more than 40 miles away from New Hope this time.
well,
Even more true.
I love, yeah, the hubris there is great because I think in my mind I always assumed that, like, let's say their daylight counterparts, they might be giants, that these two guys played a plethora of instruments above and beyond guitar. But the fact that they only play guitar is really funny.
Yeah. And I just don't understand why they chose to go that route, because it's also not like the guy who was playing drums with them in high school, Mean Ween, wasn't down with the project, because he still kind of plays with them some to this day. I think they were just like, it's not really working out, dude. We're going to replace you with literally nothing. We're going to replace you with a recording of someone else, of me on a drum machine.
Hey, less mistakes.
Yeah, that's a fair point. With this completely weird and unique setup of two guitar players, a singer, and a backing track recorded and played over the PA, they say, hey, let's go get some gigs. And at the time, Mickey is 16 and he's working at the local gas station. And he is somewhat acquainted, because it's a very small town, with this couple that owns the one big music venue in town called John and Peter's. So apparently every time they would come to the gas station, Mickey would just like open their car door and throw a tape into there, and like they'd like come back and just find a tape on the seat and be like, what the hell is this? And so
Guerrilla marketing, man.
yeah, the guy apparently like throws it into the back all the time, and he's like, I just keep getting these tapes every time I come to the gas station. Doesn't listen to them for a long time, and then eventually listens to them and likes what he hears, sort of, because
That I feel like that explains my sentiment on this band.
Yeah. That's everyone's
Like, in
feeling
general.
after hearing this band
Yeah.
for the first time.
I like what I hear, sort of. So when I tell you that their first songs were pretty juvenile, remember that the Mollusk is the mature, several albums in version of Ween, and these are 16-year-olds making these songs. They are extremely juvenile. So again, there's kind of a charm to them. Like one of the songs is literally like just Mickey singing about like how much he despises New Hope and hates working at the gas station, and like is using gay slurs for all the people that he has to pump
Jeez.
gas for and
Very-
stuff. Yeah,
Very 80s.
Well, I
very
think
80s.
I think the way that I found out that they were actually from the Philly area was when I don't know if it was that show that you're referring to, the talent show, but this was years ago, somehow go down a rabbit hole and came across one of their early shows that looked like it was high school-esque. And I saw that they had a song called Pork Roll, Egg and Cheese. And if you're from this area, anything
Totally.
egg and cheese that has a breakfast meat on it is like quintessential Philly, New York, and it's fucking delicious, by the way. But when I saw that they were writing songs called Pork Roll, Egg and Cheese, I was like, these guys don't give a shit, and they're definitely from this area.
Yeah, that made it on to their second album, Pork Roll, Egg and Cheese.
Oh, how about that?
Yeah.
There it is.
So they are, again, trying to do this guerrilla marketing campaign to get themselves some kind of buzz. But what they're also doing is they are just creating EPs and just distributing them amongst their friends. And these are literally just, they have a 4-track tape recorder, they have a drum machine, and they are making songs and making tapes, and then manually copying the tapes and physically writing stuff on them and handing them out to their friends. But over the course of 1985, as far as I can tell, they create and release the EPs Mrs. Slack, Chris Hokie, Mike Banks, Kim Tullio, and John Ward, which I assume are just the names of the people that they made the tapes for. And we're like, here's a tape that I made for this guy, and we made a bunch of copies and handed them out.
That's funny. At
Yeah.
85, you said. 85, they're doing this.
This is 85 that they're doing this.
Wow. All right.
So then in 86, they create the EP Erica Peterson's Flaming Crib Death. In 1987, they create the Crucial Squeegee Lip. I'm pretty sure he was still working at the gas station. And then in 1988, they create Ween 2, Axe as Bold as Boognish, and the Live Brain Wedgie. So the sense of humor has been there from the beginning. It's kind of baked
Yeah.
into the product from day one. Surprisingly, this ends up working and they start gigging. They start playing around town. They're playing in the sort of greater Philadelphia, southern New Jersey area, but they play at John and Peters in New Hope, and they get a gig at a club in Trenton called City Gardens, which is, Rob, probably kind of like bottom of the hill. Nationally touring acts would come through and they would open for them as these nationally touring acts would come through. So, 500-600 person room at most that has some cachet and gets some cool bands coming through. I mean, the Foo Fighters weren't playing there, but they opened for They Might Be Giants, Guar,
Hey.
Butthole Surfers, and the Rollins Band during that time. Henry Rollins, apparently huge fan of Ween.
Well,
really loved them.
The guy that formed the Rollins Band is their producer, right? We're gonna get to that in the story, yeah. Those other bands make perfect sense with Ween, for the record.
I mean, just the name alone of Butthole Surfers, regardless of what they actually sound like, you see that and Ween on a bill, you're going.
Yeah, totally.
But to be clear, you're talking about a bar. The place is just a bar with a stage.
Yeah, it's just like a club. Yeah. Like I would say club is probably the most kind that you could be to it. It's closed now, but it was one of those, couple hundred, maybe up to 500 or 600 person rooms that bands would come through, probably play in New York, probably play in Philly, and they'd play Trenton in between and just play at like a, small venue or something like that.
Sure.
So they end up hold on one second. They end up playing a show for their friend's band. This band is called Skunk. And then they're playing at a club in New Jersey, and Skunk is like, hey, we want you to open for us. And Ween's like, great, we'll come and open for you. Little did Ween know that David Ayers, an A&R guy from the Minneapolis-based label Twin Tone, is there to see Skunk because Twin Tone is thinking about signing Skunk. And Ween is the opening band. And he signs Ween that night. It was like, you guys are awesome. I want to sign you to my record label. Before they even signed Skunk, by the way. Like, he's like, they're thinking about maybe signing Skunk, and they see Ween, and they're like, no, we got to sign these guys right now. And they end up signing them. And they release an album in 1990, which is the one that is their official first album. It's got the pink cover with the cartoon drawing of the Boognish on it, and it's called God, Ween, Satan, the Oneness. And very much in line with a lot of stuff that will come later, they do not record any new material for this. They basically take all of the recordings that they had made in their home over the last 6 years, pick the best ones, and put them on this album. This album is 26 tracks and just a shade under 77 minutes long. It is a monster of an album.
Thus begins their lack of ability to self-edit.
Yeah.
Well, can we talk about the genres that Wikipedia has put that album into? Here we go. Punk rock, heavy metal, comedy rock, experimental rock, slacker rock, and funk. I don't think you can come up with a bigger variation across.
I don't agree with funk.
Yeah,
I feel like take everything else on there.
It's like when we did the Living Color record, and there was literally like 13 genres that I think actually made the by the numbers. So they're still the king of genre hopping.
Yeah. So they released this album. They didn't have to record any new songs for it, though. And so by the time Twin Tone is ready to release God Ween Satan, I'm sorry, God Ween Satan in November of 1990, they already have their next album recorded. It is called The Pod, and it is named so because that was what they called their apartment, where they recorded all of the music. It is literally them and a Tascam 4-track tape recorder in this apartment called The Pod, just making songs by themselves, no oversight. They're kind of just doing whatever the hell they want. And then
so the Tascam 388?
It's not the Tascam 388. The Tascam 388 is even better than what they were using.
Oh my gosh. Hard to imagine.
This is like a little, it's like a little 4-track version of it. It's really super crappy.
Oh, you mean it went onto like tapes you could buy at the store? Is that what you're talking
Yeah.
about?
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I think I actually had one like that a long time ago. Yeah.
So they then have yet another album ready for release, but Twin Tone not super thrilled with the performance of God, Ween, Satan. They decide they're going to pass on releasing their next album, The Pod. And so they end up releasing it on Shimmy Disc, which is a New York based, I'm going to shock you, indie label that decided that they were going to release it. So they're using drum machines for almost all the percussion. They're doing weird stuff like pitching their vocals, using all these kind of guitar tape effects, and just super being weird and experimental. And also, again, approaching the project with, I think, a sense of humor that I really appreciate. The cover for the pod, they literally just took the cover of Leonard Cohen's greatest hits, where Leonard Cohen is standing there, and they took a picture of their friend with a weird breathing apparatus on, cut the friend's head off from the picture, pasted it over Leonard Cohen's head, and that's the album cover. Like, that's kind of cool. I think that that is very much in sticking with their overall ethos of like, yeah, we're still going to approach this like we're 16 years old and we're making this shit for our friends,
It
which I can
actually
appreciate.
is. No, it actually is really creative. Not to overly dissect something so strange, but it would have been much more obvious choice to just attempt to recreate that photo, which would have been kind of easy, to be honest. But it's
Yeah,
the
yeah,
idea of like taking a separate photo and then making a collage is very strange.
yeah. They did change the song titles on the cover. They didn't keep the original Leonard Cohen song titles. They made that change too. So, they probably got the record company's probably like, you have to do that. You can't
It
have
has to
Leonard
the
Cohen.
legal
You're not
team,
covering
right?
Suzanne on this album. Like, what the hell's wrong with you? So the pod, it's a cult hit, doesn't sell all that well. Shocking. There's zero sales certifications. I can't find any charting. I can't find any sales numbers on it. But it does allow them to tour extensively on it. And they end up doing a 3-leg tour from September of 91 through June of 92. And that includes a week of
Wow.
touring in the UK. And they also get to do a recording with John Peel in the BBC studios while they're on tour there. So, like, they are one of those bands. We talked about these kind of bands a lot. Their impact is so much greater than their sales because people who were tastemakers liked them and were very much like, hey, you're doing something cool and unique. Again, we talked about like Henry Rollins being a huge proponent for them, even though one of the guys from his band kind of like left the band to end up producing Ween at a point. He's still like, he described them as like this lone ray of sunshine in the dark music scene of the 90s. Like, Les Claypool of Primus, again, I'm going to shock you, Les Claypool of Primus likes Ween. Uh, he
No.
has said that the Mollusk was the best album that was put out in the last 20 years on the 20-year anniversary of the Mollusk. Like, he's
Oh,
super into it.
first of all, I saw a video with him and Dean Ween, and I couldn't get it out of my head. He kept calling it the Mollusk. He
Oh, I
insists on
did see that
pronouncing
one
it
too,
that
the
way.
Mollusk. Yeah.
I saw that video too. It's funny, and I expected when I saw that they both had guitars, I was like, oh, maybe Claypool's busting out a guitar. No, still just jamming along on a bass. So it's got one of those resonator basses, but yeah, it was cool. He's definitely seems really into Ween. It seems like he knew all the songs, was down.
Yeah, and also they bonded over being fishermen because they both like to fish, and so that's why they were kind of on a boat. Like, I got the impression that like they were like, we're gonna do like 10 minutes interview and then we're gonna like fish for some stripers over here. Like, that was actually their plan for the day, was just to get drunk and fish off the boat, which, not bad.
Not a bad
Yeah.
afternoon.
I can get down with that.
Yeah. So Ween catches the attention with the pod and their tour of a major label. And in 1992, they are signed to Elektra Records. Elektra's been coming up a lot on the pod recently about, I think that their approach to trying to get cutting edge bands has led to some really great experimental material. And I'm sure some flops that we've never heard of.
Sure.
But Elektra comes through and they released their first major label album in November of 1992, which is Pure Guava. Again, they have a major record label backing, and they're like, we're not going to the studio. We have like our apartment here that we can just fuck around
Why
on a
would we
4-track with.
go?
Why would I go to a
Why would
studio?
we
That
go
doesn't
into
make
the
any sense.
studio?
And so they record Pure Guava, and it contains their first, and I'm going to use big air quotes here, hit, which is Push the Little Daisies, which, yes, was famously lampooned on a Beavis and Butthead episode, but it did get Ween a wider audience. And Mike Judge actually likes Ween, but he just thought it was, funny to
Well,
rip the shit out of him in that episode.
Well, if you watch the video though, it's ripe for being mocked by Beavis and Butthead. Just the way they're dancing around. It's say what you want about the song. I think the song sucks, but like it's tailor made to incur the wrath of Beavis.
No, but it's come up a couple of times on the podcast. But let's talk about the Beavis and Butthead approach to breaking bands, because like even though they're making fun of it, they're definitely also promoting it. I discovered that's definitely the first place I heard Ween.
Oh,
also,
yeah.
and
They
became
broke White Zombie too, I think.
so many
well,
songs
so,
I
okay, so
heard.
fuck them.
I always think of what is it? King Missile, Detachable Penis.
Yep, totally. That one. Yeah, that's definitely the first time I heard of that one.
You're spoiling my future podcast idea of Beavis and Butthead explains the 90s here.
My point is that MTV did have a couple shows like this, but in the time when lots of people were creating videos, but not a lot of them were mainstream necessarily, there were a few shows like 120 minutes or stuff that was happening late at night where you'd get some airplay for some weirdo stuff, and Beavis and Butthead was arguably the best delivery mechanism for that. So very successful.
Yeah. And for people that are not our age and maybe also not from the US, I cannot explain to you how, number one, subversive, and number two, universally beloved by young boys Beavis and Butthead was. It was the thing your parents told you not to watch because there was that one episode where they stuck a firecracker up a frog's butt and they were like, oh, they're torturing animals on this show. But it was funny, and I watched the shit out of Beavis and Butthead. And like kind of everybody that I knew could quote Beavis and Butthead, watched it a lot. So the reach of that show for the young, specifically male audience was huge. And so putting a music video on there is gonna get millions of kids to watch it.
That's a huge get. I wonder if Ween knew about it before it aired. And I feel like we'd be remiss, since we're talking about Beavis and Butthead so much here. They made a big splash on Saturday Night Live this past season.
They did, yes, with that skit where, again, I feel like it was aimed at people in their men in their mid 40s who were like, I know exactly who Beavis and Butthead are. And
Yeah.
yes, I got that one right away.
I think I read that it's the most watched sketch that SNL has produced like in the last 10 years or something crazy
Wow.
like that.
It is amazing how enduring their impact was, because like it was funny, and I still think it is funny and anchored my like early teenage years. But the premise of the show is pretty weak, but it's so much in the characters and the delivery, and the videos were such a big part of it that when I try to find some of it on YouTube now, I know they scrub some of the videos, or they try to pull them for licensing reasons, and the show loses a lot, I think, without the video commentary.
Yeah, which I feel like at first that was probably just a vehicle to have to write less material. I'm like, well, how about we just for like 10 minutes of the episode, we just play music videos and talk shit on them
And just do the
write
Mystery
plot
Science
points and
Theater
stuff
thing.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But this is 1993 when they are on Beavis and Butthead. And Beavis and Butthead Do America, the movie, came out in like 1996. So they were like riding the wave of this early Beavis and Butthead popularity. And so I'm sure that Electra was super happy about that. But once again, Pure Guava doesn't really sell all that much. Its peak position is number 93 on the Australian charts. Again, for some reason, the Aussies love Ween. There's a great anecdote in this documentary. It's the guy who owns John and Peter's, that club in New Hope, talking about a girl coming to their club And she walks in and she's like, "Is this the home of Ween?" And he's like, yeah, sure, whatever." And she's like, "Can I meet them?" And he's like, "Yeah, like absolutely. We could totally introduce you to them. They would love to meet you. They just happen to be on tour in Australia right now." And she apparently breaks down crying and is like, "I'm from Australia and I flew here specifically to come to New
Oh
Hope to
no.
meet Ween, and they're touring in my fucking
Oh my
where I live
God.
right now." Is devastated by this.
That's such a pre-internet tale of woe.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like 1998, and you're like, "Oh my God, I had no idea you were touring." Yeah, pretty fantastic. So, notably, Pure Guava again recorded exactly the same way as their previous albums, just as weird, just as experimental, just as juvenile. They didn't change because they had major label backing, which is pretty admirable. And I really appreciate the ability to not be scared by the moment. Like you're given the opportunity to release an album on a major label. You have finally some backing, you got some clout. Maybe you're going to get a wide release, and you put songs like Flies on My Dick and Poop Ship Destroyer on your album. Like they're not like, "All right, let's clean it up. We got to be serious now, guys. We got some major label backing." No, no, they still put some pretty ridiculous songs on here.
I would love to have been in the room when I don't know if they have a manager, but when they found out that Elektra was backing them, like, do you think they're like, "Ah, cool"?
Yeah.
And like,
Yeah.
what do you mean? Like, do you think they freaked out? I don't know. I just hearing
I
these guys, I just don't think they cared.
I don't think that they freaked out. I think the more charitable version of it is that they thought, "Well, this is what got us here. So we're gonna keep doing what got us here because people
Yeah.
like it. So why change it up? We don't want to overcomplicate things. Let's just keep doing what we're doing."
Well, that's why in my tweet, I reference like the confidence to be able to put out all this weird shit. You still put out weird shit, and it happens to be your most normal thing. The I've just always respected that. I think they were talented enough that they definitely could have sold out. They definitely could have gone much more commercial and softer. And I tip my hat to that because yeah, it's confidence in what you want to do, and it's not like we're out there doing a bunch of other side projects either. To maybe they were that I'm just not aware of, but that they were really all in on this thing, and so I think that's cool.
Yeah. So they now have their major label record contract. They've been on Beavis and Butthead, and they're on top of the world. But at this point, it's still just Aaron and Mickey, old Diener and Jeaner, making music as a duo. They are touring consistently, and so they're kind of thinking of live lineups, and they realize that they need to expand their overall sound a little bit. They add a drummer, Claude Coleman Jr., and this is when Andrew Weiss, who was from the Rollins band, steps in and becomes the bass player for them while they're touring, and kind of convinces them that for their next album, they should actually go into a studio. So, for like the first time ever, they go into a studio. Andrew Weiss is going to produce them. It's the first time anybody but just Dean and Gene has produced their music at all. And this leads to 1994's Chocolate and Cheese. And that was the first album of theirs that I bought and listened to after it came out, but I listened to it pretty extensively. It's kind of what made me fall in love with Ween. It is 16 tracks. It's exactly 55 minutes long. Features songs like Voodoo Lady, Freedom of 76, Mr. Would You Please Help My Pony, the HIV song, and Roses Are Free, which ends up becoming a staple of Fish's live shows, which
Oh.
why and how I don't know, but it actually fits pretty well with their live sound. Like it's a good song, it's catchy, and Fish has covered it like something like 50 times in the course of their last 20 years.
I think they've covered it 50 times, spanning a total of 77 years of playtime.
Yeah, right. It can be a long one. And like there's a quote, I think it's from Mickey, who is like, "I like Trey Anastasio. Trey Anastasio is a great guy. Fish fucking sucks."
I was hoping you were going to read that quote.
Yeah, not a fan, not a fan. But the album, again, they get a producer, they go into the studio, it becomes kind of a hit. and it reaches number 10 on the US Heat Seekers charts. Again, that's for bands that have yet to chart in any one specific genre or anything.
So that would extrapolate to number 1 in Australia, right?
Actually, I don't know what it got to in Australia. Give me a second. I can find that out. Let's see what the chart performance is. Number 80 on the Australian charts overall. Number 80 overall.
Does this have anything to do with the cover of the album by any chance? Is that possible?
I'm sure the teenage boy market for chocolate and cheese.
So,
there it is. All right.
What they wanted and was rejected by the music studio, they just wanted the belt on there. And they were like, we're going to get like a big gay sailor guy in like a Speedo to wear the belt. And the record label was like, abso-fucking-lutely not. We need tits on the cover. And so they were like, fine, we'll just get like a really big chested woman and have her be on the cover then with the belt on. That works for us. But like in kind of a charmingly non-misogynistic way, they're like, how about like the queerest, biggest sailor guy we can find? Where's this belt? And the record label had to shoot him down.
Good to see the guys in the suits still, knew how to play things.
Yeah, they know what's going to
Explain to me what the guy with the spikes is, the little character there. What's he called? You referenced it earlier. Boognish. Is that just the little character they made up, or is that some reference to something?
That is a character that they made up.
All
and
right.
I am like, I'm not going to get into the mythology behind the Boognish, but it's basically like they claim that they sprouted from the demon god Boognish, and that was sort of how the band came about while they were building their own weird ass mythology around it, Yeah.
All right.
So they had this album. It does really well. They changed up their formula. They went into the studio, and this is by far their most successful album to date. So what does a band that has been kind of struggling to break through do when they finally do kind of break through? They say, we're not doing that again. We're not gonna go back into the studio again. And in fact, they have a very acrimonious breakup with Andrew Weiss.
Whoa.
Because he is thinking, I'm going to produce you guys. I'm going to be in your band. And they thought, we're losing control of this. It used to just be us making all the decisions. And we don't like having anybody else try to make decisions for us. And so they have another album that they're thinking about making. And they decide that what they want to do to punctuate the breakup with Andrew Weiss, they take all of their recording equipment that they have purchased that was in Andrew Weiss's house. They take it out of his house and they move it to some shitty rental that they got on the beach at the Jersey Shore in the middle of winter. Really distance themselves from the Andrew Weiss relationship. They then decide, well, for our next album, before we release this album that we're working on, we're going to go to Nashville and we're going to make a country album. And this is what becomes 12 Golden Country Greats. And they go to Nashville, and Dean and Gene do not play on that album at all. All they do is sing. They got a killer band of backup players that are like Nashville session guys they called them the Shit Creek Boys. This includes Elvis's old backing choral quartet, the Jordanaires.
No way.
Oh yeah, they got like absolute killers to go in there and record the music. And this is one of the things that I think is fucking hilarious, because they have the music ready, the band plays the music, and it's almost like the dichotomy of Ween. The music's good, and the music is very serious and well composed and layered. And that's all that the musicians know. And then when they hear the lyrics later, many of them demanded to have their names removed from the project. And we're like, I can't be associated with this.
Oh, so they didn't know that's what they were signed up for?
They had no idea that that's what they were signed up for.
Well, they didn't know Piss Up a Rope was going to be like the...
But they probably didn't know it was going to be called Piss Up a Rope. And they didn't, apparently the song Japanese Cowboy, they thought was like super offensive, and they didn't want to be associated with that. And, but like the songs on it are really fucking good. Like Help Me Scrape the Mucus Off My Brain, which is a ridiculous title. That's a really good song. Like it's just a nice country song. It's got a weird hook line, but everything else in it is really good. He keeps talking about like I had to spend the dog food money as like that's like the big sign of like everything's fucked up in my life. I had to spend the dog food money. I'm like, that's a good
That's pretty
evocative
low. That's a
line.
good country line. Yeah.
It's a good country line. This song has this album also has what was at one point my son's favorite song, which is the song Mr. Richard Smoker, which you listen to it a lot before you realize that he's calling a guy a dick smoker.
Oh my God,
Yeah.
Richard Smoke.
And it's a really good song. It's actually like it's catchy. It's got a little ragtime vibe to it. But this is what they decided to do to follow up their successful album. They're like, let's make a country album that nobody wants to fucking hear. Almost like career self-sabotage.
It's my wife actually probably couldn't tell you anything about Ween, but she actually like legitimately likes that album. Like she knows it's a joke and all that shit, the lyrics anyway. But it does sound, it's very professional. I mean, that tracks that the musicians, gave it their all and were maybe a little bit bait and switched.
Yeah. But there's a very interesting timeline that's happening here. So they break up with Andrew Weiss. Dean and Gene, they go to the beach. It's the winter time. And basically within 3 weeks, they have written most of what I consider to be like the good songs on the Mollusk. All right. So the first song that they write is Cold Blows the Wind. And so they went to this crappy, middle winter town. There's nothing to do there. It's dark, it's cold. And they have all this recording equipment, but they have no songs. And so Aaron just busts out a 17th century folk song book and it has Cold Blows the Wind in it, but they don't know how to read sheet music. And so they couldn't figure out like what the actual song structure was. So they just wrote their own song structure to the lyrics that were already provided. And I thought that was like really cool. They're just like, hey, these are pretty good lyrics. We can write this kind of like dark, sea chanty-esque style song around it. Super cool. They write the Mollusk, Mutilated Lips.
Well, hold on. Can we stay on? Are we gonna talk about Cold Blows the Wind again, or was that it?
We can talk about Cold Blows the Wind a little bit more. Yeah.
We don't need to get in too deep into the details of the song, but I was actually sad you didn't put it on the focus list because I do really, really like the song. I think it's a stone cold classic Ween song, and that story in particular that you just told, Tom, had me Googling today on Amazon 17th century songbook. I think you and I should try that one. I want to do a whole record like that.
Get the next concept album teed up.
That sounds awesome, number one. And number two, I kind of don't know why I didn't include Cold Blows the Wind because I also very much like that song. I think it's really layered and they do a really interesting thing where you can almost sing any melody over that by the end of the song and it will kind of work because there's so many voices doing so many overlapping melodies in there. And it's very well constructed and it makes sense that they didn't write the lyrics because the lyrics are really good, but they do also sound very old timey lyrics,
Yeah, but I do think it showcases that they can be straight ahead and still make it really interesting and rich. And so it's just one of the ones that jumped out to me for that reason. But
yeah, but no, I agree. Fantastic song. So they record that. They write and record The Mollusk. They write and record Mutilated Lips. They write and record She Wanted to Leave. They write and record Ocean Man. And they write and record The Golden Eel. And then they head on off to Nashville to record 12 Golden Country Greats. What they don't know is that the house that they were staying in did not have any heat. And the fact that they had packed it full of recording equipment that was on all the time was heating the house. And so they turn off all the equipment, they leave and they go to Nashville for a couple of weeks and they come back and the pipe underneath the sink had burst and flooded the house, which then iced over and ruins all of the equipment that they have in there. And just by happenstance, they had moved the box of master tapes off of the ground and onto the kitchen table and saved the project.
Whoa.
Yeah. So
That's
they basically are like, okay, well, this fucking sucks. They said that they literally just like picked through anything that they could find that was salvageable and threw it in a truck and went back to New Hope, PA. and then just recorded in their apartments and like other friends' houses and stuff like that for the last couple of songs on the album. But they had recorded most of it in that time. So this is a concept album. We've talked about this before. Dark sea shanty material, the musings of someone tripping balls at an aquarium, basically. And
which sounds pretty fun, actually. Like, I would not turn down the opportunity to do that.
I mean, that explains the album cover. So,
and it is, well, you talk about the album cover. You know who designed the album cover? Good old Storm Thorgerson, the guy who designed the Dark Side of the Moon album
Pink
cover.
Floyd, yeah,
Yeah.
Oh,
all right.
shit.
That's
yeah,
badass.
he also did Houses of the Holy too. Was that him? And he liked the album so much that after designing the cover, he designed a whole bunch of just like extra material, like posters and other like designs and drawings just for free and gave them to them. It was like, I just love this album. This is so cool. Here's all the stuff that inspired me.
Yeah, I read that he basically was in full old man mode and thought all modern music was shit. And then he heard Ween for the first time. He's like, wait a minute, this is the best thing I've heard in decades. I need to do everything for you.
Yeah. Well, you know, honestly, a lot of people consider this a masterpiece. And when you consider that the #1 album of 1997 was Spice by the Spice Girls, they were probably a breath of fresh air for people who are looking for something a little
I was just
different.
going to invoke Spice Girls as the, you know, the contrast in that story. So thanks for validating that.
The anti-Ween. Well, and also, you know, you're getting to the end of the grunge era here. Everything was kind of sounded a little tired, and new metal was coming along.
Oh yeah, you're opening the door for Limp Bizkit.
Yeah, talk about self-seriousness, right?
Yeah, totally. So again, it's kind of been considered a landmark album. In 1997, Newsweek called it the 14th best album of 1997. And again, I think that
What year did Hoobastank come out?
Ouch.
I think that it has become very well regarded as it is aged as well. Because I do think that it still sounds kind of unique and it still sounds very Ween, but it sounds like they took a step forward production wise and in terms of song structure. And lastly, before we get into the songs, I think that it must be mentioned that this album, The Mollusk, was the direct inspiration for SpongeBob SquarePants. And in fact, the creator, Steven Hillenburg, literally called up Ween, and they took his call because they're really approachable dudes, and like pitched the idea of SpongeBob SquarePants to them. And they were like, that sounds fucking great. You should totally do that. And then he asked them to make a song for them, which they did. They made a song and gave it to SpongeBob. It was considered a little too weird to be the title track for SpongeBob, but it was included in an episode early on. But like SpongeBob has created it's grossed like $13 billion in sales and stuff like that. So, and it's literally like, I think that Steven Hillenburg was just kind of like getting high and listening to the Mollusk and like looking at aquariums and was like, this fucking speaks to me, man.
And that is the answer to why Ocean Man has so many streams, right? That it was featured in the SpongeBob movie or something.
Yeah, the first SpongeBob movie, it plays like right at the end of the movie. And so a bunch of kids were like, oh, this song Ocean Man is great. Let me check out the rest of Ween's catalog. Oh, the HIV song. Let me listen to that one.
Like a spinal meningitis.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, back to your point about this being seen as their sort of magnum opus or whatever you want to call it. You made a comment earlier about the band viewing this as their best song. I don't think I realized how much they view this as their best song until I read a sort of oral history that one of the guys did with a reporter where he sort of went track through track and shared some of those stories that you talked about, Tom, about the house getting flooded. I mean, they unequivocally hold this up as their best work. It's not even like they say, oh, well, I like this and I sort of like this other album too. Like they really believe truly that this is like the best thing that they've ever done, and there's something to be said for that.
Well, I just want to add to that. I read that piece as well and got some of that vibe, but one thing I liked about it, I think is an interesting point, that links back to the artwork is that they felt really confident once they had the tracks. They're like, this is really good. It's the best thing we've done. We need amazing artwork to match it. And so they call the guy who makes amazing artwork. And of course, it worked out. And I have to say, even before, I didn't know before really today that Storm Thurgenson did the artwork, but I was looking at it all week going, that's pretty freaking cool cover. So it's just funny to me how the artwork of a record can help crystallize its classic status. I think that is true.
Yeah, it's a full package thing. And Alan, to touch on your point, I think that what they have always maintained is that this album was the closest to them perfectly executing the vision that they had for the album. And so I think that's why they like it so much. They're like, we wanted to do this thing and we did it. And maybe there's other songs and other albums that other songs that are better than some of the songs on here. But when you consider this as a project, this is the project we went into with a clear vision and executed very well on that vision.
That's a
That's
really
gotta feel good.
good. Yeah, no, I hear you. And it's really hard to do. I mean, we could have a whole podcast just talking about that concept that you just threw out there, Tom, and that's the appropriate metric for success for any artistic project, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, Chocolate and Cheese, which again, I love that album, but they were thinking we're losing control and they took the control back and then had their most fruitful experience from it. They must have been very validated in that decision. So good on them. So I think we've yammered on enough about the lead up to this album. Let's start talking about some songs.